Angela, was one of our broadcast students. She's going to be starting in a couple of weeks at ABC News as an associate producer for the digital division. Um, and Angela has done, another frequent contributor to the news service, has done some great work for us with a video we're going to see a little bit of, and I'd like to talk to her about. And she'll also tell you a little bit about the podcast. And I will say that this, Angela, I didn't mention this to you, but this piece is another one that I cited in the application that helped us get the award, which is great. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the salt of the earth.
Sure. This is one of those really interesting stories where someone mentioned something to me and I wasn't quite sure it was a story. So like Tanzina, we both covered East Harlem and always went to the community board meetings. I had a really good friend who's also serves on the community board, and just kind of called them and said, hey, Matt, I know what's been said at the meetings. Is there anything else going on that maybe hasn't been brought up? And he just started listing a whole bunch of items that they were planning for the next meeting. And he mentioned this whole issue about a salt pile. And he just started talking about it, and I was like, a salt pile, this is, so I kind of like, what else is going on? It's kind of went straight through that. And after taking notes of, all the things that he was telling me, I just kind of thought about this salt pile story again. I'm like, I've been to all these community board meetings. We hadn't heard anything about a salt pile. What is it? What's going on? And I was in need of a sort of an issue story for my urban class. So called Matt back up like a day later. I said, okay, Matt, just talk to me a little bit more about this salt pile. And basically what it is this salt pile is like 40 feet tall. It sits on the side of the Harlem East River in East Harlem. And the sanitation department wants to move the salt pile from where it currently is to basically across the street from a housing department. And there was some concerns from the city council and the community board about having a salt pile so close to where people live. Wind blows and salt's blowing. It's already leaking into the East Harlem River, and that's one of the reasons why they want to move it from the current location. I mean, to us, it's affecting, sea life. So I said, this is really interesting. So during our spring break, when everyone else was in wherever, Puerto Rico and all these great places, I was out on the East River looking at this salt pile. I just drove out. And there were a number of gentlemen out there who were fishing, and started just talking to them about this salt pile. They're like, oh yeah, this has been here forever, since I was a kid. One guy was, in his mid-50s and remembers, just sort of jumping off the top of that, I think that's a bridge. Yeah, off the side of the bridge, and he's like jumping onto the salt pile when they were kids. It was just like, it's always been a part of their life. And so I started asking them about, did they feel like, did they even know that they were planning to move the salt pile? And they were like, oh, really? We didn't know that. Where are they moving it? So I explained to them where they were moving it. And immediately they were like, why are they moving it so close to the housing project? Why would they move it like right basically in people's backyards? And so I was asking them questions about, them being out there fishing. They're like, yeah, years ago we used to see fish come back and they're just like slimy and all this stuff on the fish. And a lot of it had to do with, again, the salt just leaking into the water and having an impact on the sea life. So I basically spent about, 2 hours just hanging out with people who were coming out there fishing. And then I went over to the housing complex, which is where they were across the street from the new site, and started talking to people. And everyone knows the salt pile. But very few people knew that they were about to move it to where, basically across the street from them. So my next call was to the Department of Sanitation, and I called them and just to get more information, and they're like, yep, we have plans in to have the salt pile move. And their reasoning was because the Willis Avenue Bridge needed to be fixed and expanded. And they're doing this whole new sort of like green walkway, and so that entire area, I guess probably 5 or 10 years from now, is going to be new housing developments. They want to extend the park. And so they needed to get this salt pile out the way because it was going to impede any of that progress that they were planning. But on the flip side, they're moving it literally across the street from where people live. And there was an empty area where they want to move it that used to be trees. It was sort of like a little park, an unofficial park. And that's where they were going to place it. And folks were telling me that in the community that, for years we've asked them to fix this area up so they can be the park again, so they can have the trees and kids can play over there. But instead, they tore down, they were about to get rid of all the trees that are over there. Some of them had already been removed, so they can prepare to put this huge storage facility which would house the salt. And that's what the Department of Sanitation said. They said, well, one thing we are doing, we're not just going to leave it out and open like it is now. We're going to build a container to put the salt in. So then folks are like, well, we don't want to look out our windows and see this huge salt container. I mean, so I went to the city council meetings, and the first round, they approved the movement of the salt pile. It had to go through another round of approval. And I also spoke with the city council. Now, the city council had been fighting this for quite some time, but I kept asking them, well, how come most of the people in the community don't know about this? I mean, there were some people who did know, but the vast majority of the folks I spoke with had no idea that the salt pile was being moved. And so they were saying that they had, passed out flyers, and they tried to work with the tenant association. So I ended up getting the name of the woman who runs the tenant association. Wonderful elderly lady. She was great. We went to interview her, and she was saying that they have literally been fighting this for almost a decade, just years, and they were concerned about what impact, if they move the salt pile, is going to have on their living. I mean, they already have problems with pipes being eroded and water coming out brown, and just a lot of other sanitation issues that they felt like if this salt pile was moved any closer to them was just going to make it even worse. So again, just took, I don't even know, like a long time. I think weeks or probably a month and a half before the whole thing just came together, and several trips to the salt pile because, as Jerry mentioned, it was a broadcast story. So Scotty was great. I mean, I was calling her like on the Saturdays and Sundays, like, Scotty, I want to shoot this salt pile. I want to make sure it looks great. And just really coaching me through the angles to shoot it so it wouldn't look like this flat. So you can see the depth of it. You can see what we're really talking about. You can see how big this thing really is. And so most of it I ended up shooting myself, and then my classmate Jigo, he helped me do some of the interviews, and then we shot the park where they want to relocate it, and just you can see the trees there and how they plan to remove those. So this whole story finally came together, and I ended up speaking to most people on all sides, and if you're wondering how it turned out, they got approval to move the salt pile. I think it actually is being built as we speak, and I think it's going to be ready. I think this summer. By the end of this summer, it should already be in place, and all the salt would have been moved into the storage facility. So this is one of those David and Goliath fights where I guess Goliath kind of won, if you look at it from the point of, the community kind of lost out in having this facility right next to them, and sort of the long-term impact that it's going to have on their neighborhood.
So if you're taking notes, this is a follow-up story that you guys
Yeah.
can do when you come back here in the summer, which is great. This wasn't a story that we got on to TV or any bigger media, but what was gratifying was I know that we got picked up by some community websites, which, Angela talked about a lot of people in the neighborhood not knowing about it. Well, they sure as hell do now. And in this case, they may have not been able to stop it, but they're going to be watching this as it goes on. And hopefully, like I said, you guys will pick it up, and maybe that salt pile will get moved right back.
Right. One thing I should also mention, I didn't mention, I should say that the Department of Sanitation and the Department of Parks did agree that they would replant trees because, as many of you probably know, East Harlem, as Tanzina mentioned, they have a serious problem with asthma rates. And so one of the things they have is they have this Greening East Harlem initiative where they're really trying to plant as many trees as possible to kind of help cut back. There's an MTA bus station that's right up there. So they have a lot of things working against them. So the Department of Sanitation, Department of Parks agreed that they would plant X number of new trees to kind of, make up for the trees that had to be removed to put the facility there. But residents are saying that's not enough, and a lot of them are saying, why our neighborhood? If we were living somewhere else, this salt pile wouldn't be going there. So I just wanted to bring that because I wanted to be fair in telling the story, and that they are making an effort to replant trees so that folks will at least say that they're trying to do their part in terms of the Greening East Harlem initiative.